God puts us in nations, in places, not by mistake, but to do a job. What if we opened our eyes to the needs of our colleagues, of our leaders, of our subordinates, and we were a priest on their behalf? Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Brett Johnson.
And I'm Lynn Johnson.
And we're going to be talking about how to get our business into God's business. Our subtext is Let My Business Go, and we'll have guests from around the world. So thank you for joining us this week and every week on the Repurposing Business Podcast. Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Brett Johnson.
And I'm Lynn Johnson.
And this week we're talking about relationships and specifically 15 reasons why people avoid marriage. Now, this comes out of conversations that we've had with lots of young people over the years, Lynn. And when I say young people, pre-marrieds of all ages, actually. And we will jump into these 15 reasons right away. Now, before we do that, I want to actually just talk about two broad myths, I think. Well, not so much myths, but realities. First is, you can have it all. I remember once we were walking up a hill in Tahoe and Lynn was chatting to a medical doctor in his 30s who was saying to Lynn, well, what's the big rush? Like, why is it that women want to get married? I mean, remember, and you couldn't believe it, right? A medical doctor had not heard of the biological clock of his fellow singles that was ticking loudly in his ears. But anyway, but there's this notion is like, I can have my life as a single guy and wake up one day at 37 and a half years old, and then all of a sudden I can just get married, you know, or I can pursue my career, or I can have tons of girlfriends and have my freedom. This notion somehow of we can have it all, and then somehow magically at the end it all works out well.
And that's most probably from people just growing up with having way more options than their parents had, or even in different cultures in different parts of the world where it's maybe more restricted. And here it's, I can just sort of make these choices and decide how my life's going to play out. And we also spent quite a lot of time with young people, with people that were well educated, very well educated, and so they'd had this plan, I'm going to do my SATs, I'm going to get into this college, and sort of had planned out what their career looked like, and thought that they could take that same type of approach in moving towards marriage.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with a young guy who's now married with a child and so on, but he realized that he'd not actually considered relationships and built it into his plan, and that if he continued the way he was going to end up single. And so he moved cities, freed up some time, and actually ultimately
became more proactive about it.
Yeah. I think the other things that we need to recognize, and I don't want to overstate this, but it's a big factor, and that is pornography. Pornography is an overpromiser. It says to young men, you can have any woman you like, but actually the reverse is true. You end up not being able to have any woman because nobody matches up to the false images and so on, what people are engaged in. And so it's not to say that every single guy has a problem with pornography, not at all, although some estimates say maybe 50% of people do. So it's not to paint everybody with that brush, but just to say that what the enemy does is promises something and then you can't have it. So this is what happened with Adam and Eve. If you go back to the Genesis story, is you see that fruit, you can't have it, but if you have it, you'll have everything. And in reality, they had nothing. They lost so much. And so there's the same kind of over-promising and under-delivering that's out there. And whether it's the water you drink or the sports car you get or the career that you have, promising at one level and delivering at a lower level. The other thing I found with pornography is that it neuters people spiritually. And what I find with young men is that when they cannot make a decision, big life decisions, they're stuck in their decision making. It's often because they don't have the spiritual authority and that's been robbed because of a habit in pornography. So I'm just saying, clear the junk out of the trunk in that regard, because it will become a factor.
Yeah, and of course, pornography on an ongoing basis in a marriage will also take away the ability for somebody to have spiritual leadership, spiritual authority in their family and in their home.
Yeah, it can ruin a marriage. Yeah. So with those two big topics, these I can have it all and the pornography thing out of the way, let's tackle the 15 reasons.
Yeah, and can I just add in before that, also sexual impurity and immorality generally, and we've been quite alarmed in recent years to hear that even in churches and Christian groups and people going away on a Christian retreat for the weekend, the number of people sleeping with their boyfriend, their girlfriend, and that type of promiscuity is not going to actually help in any way at all as you lead towards a marriage and a good marriage.
Yeah.
Goes without saying, but
okay, so let's get into the 15 reasons. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you a PDF, which you can just download on the website. So you can just go to the episode on brettjohnson.biz, and you'll find a PDF there, which is an extract from the Convergence book on these 15 reasons why people avoid marriage, apart from these big ones in the intro. So number one, I'm too busy with my career. Now, we discussed that last time a bit, Lynn. Yeah. But the notion is, well, career first and then marriage, rather than, hey, a married person can also have a career. Yeah. Now, is this harder for women to have a career as well as a man?
I think it is harder for women because often they have to work harder than a guy would to actually get the position that they're looking for, to be able to maintain it, to prove themselves. And the statistics are also going to show, but this is going on to marriage, how much more, even in a family context, a woman carries when a man and a woman are both working.
Yeah.
I do think this whole thing of I'm too busy with my career, it can also be that there needs to be a scaling back of how much time one's spending at a job. If one's in the season of looking for a spouse, you might not take the next promotion or the job that actually requires more time. You might not even, as an entrepreneur, start a new location or a new business somewhere, because you actually have to carve out time and margin to be able to spend time getting to know people. Someone I know and love dearly told me that dating becomes like a full-time job when you're actually serious about wanting to find somebody. And you can't just squeeze that in. You actually have to allocate time to be able to build friendships, to build relationships, to spend time getting to know people. It does have to become a time priority.
Right. Okay. So myth number 2, or reason number 2, is I can't afford it. And, I have college debt. I don't have a steady income. Even if I do have a steady income, a wife is expensive, a husband is expensive. And there's this notion of I can't afford it. And when you're thinking about kids, then people quote the statistics. It costs $257,000 to raise a boy, or so much to raise a girl. And that causes people to say, how will I ever be able to afford it? The reality is that your money goes further when it's two of you who are married, and somehow you can afford the third kid. And so this, watch out, because this can be an excuse. And the other part about that is expecting too much from your lifestyle. In other words, it's I can't afford this plus a ski vacation in Tahoe, or a vacation to Hawaii, or a large king-size diamond ring, or an elaborate wedding that's Instagrammable worthy kind of deal. And so thinking about the scaling back of expectations from a materialistic perspective is something we need to consider. Yeah. The other one, number 3, is fear of losing freedom. If I get in a relationship, if I get married, I'm going to lose my freedom. And that's an interesting one, because fear, by any other name, is still fear. And actually, fear is just a big category. It can be fear of commitment, fear of losing my freedom, fear that somebody's going to get to know the real me, and that's not that great. So fear is a big factor that has to be overcome.
And I think it's good to be able to identify, because when you can identify what the root cause is, if any of these things crop up, then you know how to pray into that. You know how to ask God for healing in that area. When it's really fear, but it's being masked and being sort of communicated as something else, then you can't really deal with what is there as the root cause. So ask, if you are a single person, ask God, is there something you need to reveal to me that's maybe there, and I need to actually face up to it and get the help that I need.
Once you address fear and get rid of that, you can move pretty quickly on things. In fact, we have a very good friend who had a fear of commitment, overcame it on a Tuesday, proposed, and got married on a Friday. Now, we don't recommend that, but I'm just saying they're still married. Yeah. So let me just say that risk and faith are two sides of the same coin. And I was shocked in some respects to have conversations with men, particularly in Silicon Valley, who are entrepreneurs. And they would risk it all on a new entrepreneurial venture, a new software product, a new app, a new technology. And that was part of their daily lives. You know, they would risk. But when it came to a relationship, they wanted a guarantee. I guarantee she won't wrinkle, she won't age, she won't dilute the human gene pool. I mean, they wanted everything sewed up and wouldn't take a risk in a relationship, but they would take a risk in business every day. Crazy. Okay, the next one is glittering images. And as the one lady said to us, you know, guys want to marry a cross between Mother Teresa and Christy Brinkley, it was at that stage. Your favorite supermodel plus Mother, is it got to be as godly as Mother Teresa? I mean, out there saving humanity, but as gorgeous as, you know, a supermodel. And so there's this notion of, wow, I deserve somebody amazing. I deserve somebody who looks amazing. And this is for men and for women, right? Fortunately, you know, nowadays, I mean, you've got to have a great Instagram profile, and you've got to manage your brand. I think this is a huge hindrance. So, I mean, I watch young people, and they're out there. You and I were in Venice 40 years ago. 40 years later, we went to Venice, and what had changed? The bridges are the same, the buildings are the same, but the people taking selfies, you wouldn't believe it. And they would get out there, if their friend would have the camera, and they'd do like 10 poses, and then they'd go look at them, no. And then they redid the whole thing. And I even got a selfie of a lady taking selfies of herself on a bridge just for fun. And this notion of the glittering images, and it's like, okay, this is the kind of person that I want.
And the reality is, marriage is two imperfect people in an imperfect world, together looking to God for the grace and being rubbed together and getting our characters formed as two imperfect people. And people had these lists. I mean, we've even had people meet with us with their lists. And I don't know if you can talk about the list, Brett, but there needs to almost be a list burning because, no more said about the lists.
I had one funny story with a lady who, she was an accountant. And she told me one day, I'm going to get married. And I said, do you have some guys in mind? 4, she said. I said, and you have a process? Yeah, I said, do you have a spreadsheet? Yeah, she had a spreadsheet to figure out these 4 candidates, you know. Well, the other thing that I've seen, Lynn, is people who want to keep their options open. What happens if I commit to Susie and next week Sally comes along and she's just like plus 10% or something like that? And so this notion of, you know, I don't want to, what if somebody better comes along?
And I think that that's a concern, especially for people that believe that marriage is for life and understand the depth of the commitment and are taking it seriously. So I don't think, we're not referring to this in a flippant way. I mean, I think that's a genuine concern. People want to make the right decision because they know that they're going to stand by that. And so it is quite something to say, okay, when I choose this person, everybody else is off the table after that. And so in a sense, there has to be just that understanding that you move forward, God opens the door, you do as much of the due diligence as you need to do, and you make the commitment, and you know it's going to be good. So, but that
Yeah.
is something that can really prevent people.
Yeah, somebody once said you go into engagement with your eyes wide open, but after you've made the commitment, you keep them closed. And I think there's also a misunderstanding there because, we are designed for one thing in some categories. You can have one God. You can't have many gods from God's perspective. You get one God, you get one husband, you get one wife. There are some things that are a singular choice. And so, yes, there will be something better that comes along, no doubt, at some stage. One of the things we notice with much older singles is that they fish in the wrong pond, right? So there's a guy who's 60 and he's fishing in the 30-year-old pond, or there's somebody...
That's just straightforward creepy.
It is creepy, right? But people think, that's what I'm going to do. But the notion is that marriage is about a commitment, not just about choosing a particular person. And so once you've made that commitment, then you stick with that commitment. So one has to have an understanding of that and so on. So the next topic is really the availability of single people. Now, I don't mean that they're not available. I mean that they are too available. So we've had so many young men and women, and there's a lovely young woman, and she's in the best friend category. Guys come and tell them their stories. They come around for dinner twice a week, for example, or they go to the gym together. And she's available time-wise. She's available emotionally. And even if there's nothing physically going on, which there often isn't in these situations, but why does the guy have to up his game and get married? I remember there was a lady, we didn't know her very well, but in San Francisco, and she'd been dating a guy for quite a while, but he wasn't moving to the next level. And so she said to him, look, it's not appropriate that you unload on me emotionally what's going on at work, what's going on with your friendships, where you are in your life, if we're just friends. If we're friends, we can talk about the 49ers, we can talk about the San Francisco Giants, we can talk about the weather, but that's all. So then he agrees, and he calls her up and wants to talk about, this is how I was feeling. She said, how are those Niners doing? How are the 49ers doing? How are the Giants doing? And 3 weeks later, he proposed, right? So he was getting the benefits without any of the commitments. And so I would say, don't be overly available emotionally in a wrong way.
And yet girls will often think, well, if I can build this friendship, and if the guy realizes that he can't live without me, that this will actually lead towards marriage. Maybe he'll fall in love with me.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just a pacing. And again, from what we've observed, people ramp stuff up so quickly. And I think the media's also had something to do with it. I mean, it drives me quite crazy when I see how quickly people, and they've got to fit it into an hour and a half movie, but you go from just meeting the person and the next thing, the people are living together, and it's also people overshare too quickly, and there's a mystery, there's something, a mystique and so on, about actually you don't need to put everything out right away. There needs to be a ramping up slowly before. Don't become so so available so soon. And if we are going to be talking about the availability index, and we don't want to go the other way, but this is
what do you think the impact is of social media in terms of people's putting it all out on the table?
I think that it definitely there needs to be a more measured approach, and how one shares, what one shares, how much one shares.
Yeah. There's actually an article I referred to by a lady called Candace Waters, who talks about the fact that, are you the gal that guys come to for relationship advice about other women? Do you spend all of your time with a guy who's not your boyfriend? Are you an open book with a man who hasn't asked for a commitment? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, she said, You might need better boundaries to protect your time and your heart. This will help you resist the temptation to spend the prime years of your life with a counterfeit. What's a counterfeit? Somebody who pretends to be interested, takes up all your time, but never plans to make a commitment. I think actually the record for a longest engagement was a couple in the UK, and I think they were engaged 70 years. Something like it. Okay, last time we talked a little bit about a lack of vision, people who don't have a good vision for marriage. So I think we've covered that one. But just the practical hint would be find people, couples, they may be the same age as you, might be older, who have a good marriage, and hang out with them.
Yeah. I've also encouraged people in the past, instead of the lists, to actually write a marriage mission statement. So this, I think, is something very important. So instead of saying, oh, he needs to be tall, dark, and handsome, and educated in this way, whatever things are on one's list, but together, you two together with this kingdom marriage, what is it going to look like? And when you've written that out, your eyes are going to be open to different people. You're going to actually look for somebody different. Say, for example, you have a heart for children in need. And, since your teenage years, you've been involved with helping with children at risk in all different ways. So you might be talking about, I want in my marriage where together we can care about children. Together we could potentially foster children. Together we could go to other nations and help children. When you've described what you're looking for, and now I'm just taking one aspect, suddenly your eyes are going to be open to somebody who might not be the cutest, the most good looking, or even the most educated, or some of the other categories, but wow, that person's heart for children is so strong, is so powerful. And coming out of that, you open to somebody where the two of you together are going to be able to walk out your calling.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I had somebody actually email me recently with a one-pager just saying, look, this is who I am, this is what my life's about, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, and this is what I would want for myself in terms of a marriage. Not to put it out as a heavy thing, but almost just like a one-pager, like a resume. This is who I am, this is what I have to offer, and this is what I'm looking for. Quite proactive, yeah. The next topic is what I would call super spirituality, and what I mean by that is people over-spiritualizing or over-emphasizing the spiritual. Life is just all about the spiritual, and it's all about that. And this relationship stuff is kind of menial, practical stuff, and we don't really need to get that. Now, you might say, well, that's very rare. But I remember about, in the last 10 years, there was a group in a university town in another country, and they were studying the book Convergence. And so there was a bunch of single men and a bunch of single women. And when it got to the chapter on choosing a spouse, the woman said, look, let's get together, the men and the women, and let's talk about this. And the men didn't want to do it. Why? Well, the author happens to be me. What he was talking about was not actually choosing a flesh and blood wife. He was talking about your calling. I mean, it doesn't say that in the book. So I said, I'll come and talk to them. They didn't want to talk to me. What were they doing? Like this over-spiritualization of thing. Calling is more important, and, etc. So we actually had an instance of a couple that were quite interested in each other. And she was, both were well educated. I don't want to say too much about them. But she felt a calling to China, and he didn't. And so he didn't pursue the relationship with her, and they didn't get married. And, they went their separate ways. And she finished up her academic studies, took her a long time. Guess what? He ended up in China. And he's still in China. So it's kind of interesting, right? So,
and they're not married to each other.
They're not married to each other, right? But this notion, I do want to say, because in the book Convergence, I say, how do you integrate your career, your calling, and so forth? This notion that I have to have my calling 100% figured out before I can get married is a bad idea. You can discover a calling together as a husband and a wife. You can go on that journey together. And in fact, Um, Often, a spouse, a husband or a wife, is God's number one tool of choice to sharpen us, to refine us, to improve us. And doesn't happen where the wife is already perfect.
I was going to say, you're already perfect, so we haven't needed that one yet.
Yeah, okay. Next point, point number 9. I lack dating practice. This is a problem, you know. This is a problem with the lacking of dating practice. And I remember we met a guy, he's married now, fortunately, but he hadn't been on a date for years. And when Lynn asked him why not, he said, well, a girl turned me down the last time I asked her. And Lynn's thinking, like, was this last week? Was this 2 weeks ago? No, it was years prior to that, right? And so actually people just lack the practice. And what I recommend over here is don't do this thing of saying, if Joe over there asks 3 girls out in a month, he's a player, so he's kind of unsafe. No, he's somebody who's actually just being proactive. You know, so don't label people that way. And so just be careful, because people actually need practice. I was chatting with a young lady in Cape Town. And I said, there's this interesting guy. Oh, no, he's not for me. I said, well, how did you make up your mind so quickly? Oh, no. I said, no, you owe it to the guy to at least have a cup of coffee. I mean, so long as he's not a serial killer or a chainsaw murderer or something like it, have a cup of coffee. And one of the things that we encourage people to do, have that cup of coffee, because the guy might not be suitable for you, but he might be suitable for one of your friends. And it's better to give than receive. So think, I wonder if this guy, Lynn's trying to get out of the sun over here. It's not going to work. I wonder if this guy would be better suited for one of my friends. And so have the first cup of coffee, maybe the second cup of coffee. Take your time. Don't make a rapid decision right away and say, okay, I've written that person off. Okay, so the other thing that falls under this category is this thing of the silver bullet, as it was described to us. And so what is the silver bullet, Lynn?
Yeah, so it's where somebody, I'm going to take the guy has the silver bullet. You have just one bullet to use in a group of girls. So maybe in a singles group at the church, there's a bunch of girls and they're friends with each other. You need to pick which one you're going to date, because if it doesn't work with that person, you've used up your silver bullet. You can't ever date any of the others. And so this is something that I've also spoken to. I think it's more a women thing. I've spoken to the women and said, don't do that. Don't think, because he asked Susie out and it didn't work. Now, because I love Susie, I could never go out with him, or I would look down on anybody else who went out with him.
Or there's a quarantine period.
Or we wouldn't for ages. That's just really not fair. And it's understandable, because if Susie's heart was hurt, especially if the guy didn't like her and she maybe liked him, you almost have to stand in solidarity with your sisters, with the posse. And you might have to just go, we all need to support one another. So it didn't work with you, but maybe he's the right person for somebody else. And this also reminds me of something. We had some of our single women friends that were meeting to pray and praying that for their future husband. And they had to make a decision that we are going to rejoice with the first person who actually ends up getting married. We are not going to feel, while we're feeling sad for ourselves that it didn't happen to us, we're going to rejoice with those who rejoice. And they'd made a pre-commitment that they would celebrate whoever was the first one in this group that actually was in a relationship and ended up getting married. Because I've actually know of a situation where a woman was in one of these type of women's support groups, single women. Somebody asked her to marry them, and she actually turned him down because, or she turned down getting to know him. I don't know if he actually asked her, but she turned him down even though she loved him, because she felt that she would lose those girlfriends because she'd be the first one out of that group of single women that was getting married. And so she actually chose that her group above being in a relationship. And that, why bother even to get together to pray for someone, or why even set your heart to being married if when the opportunity comes you turn it down?
Yeah.
So let's actually open up our hearts and open up the opportunity, and let's move away from the silver bullet.
Yeah, good. So this one we won't spend much time on, but this notion that all men are untrustworthy or all women are untrustworthy. I mean, there's blanket statements which speak to fear, not
and hurt, yeah.
not expecting the best, past hurts, rather than saying, generally people are great. Generally people are good. And what we're going to do is expect the best of them and not expect that behind that nice exterior is a monster that's lurking. There are steps you can take, as we'll cover later, on how to get to know somebody, how to ascertain their character and so on. But don't go in with a blanket presumption that says that all men are bad or all women are bad. Great.
That's a good word.
I've heard some people say a spouse will impact my effectiveness for God. If I have a wife, it'll limit my effectiveness for God. And likewise, if I have a husband. We've even had people with, if I have kids, that would be a problem. It would limit the time we have to do stuff for God.
And I think that comes back to people not having a vision for the actual power of a man and a woman together, and not having a biblical understanding. Because God said it is not good for man to be alone, and he actually set it up. This is part of his plan. So to think I should choose to be single so that I can fulfill my calling, fulfill my vision, fulfill my mission, you're actually countering what God has said. And that doesn't mean, obviously our hearts go out to people who are single. You're single, you can fulfill your call in amazing ways. We're just saying, when someone has the opportunity to actually be married but says, oh, well, maybe first I need to fulfill my call. No, you can do that call while you're married, as a married couple.
Bit of an extreme situation, but we have friends who were missionaries in Africa, and they were married, and they didn't have kids. They chose not to have kids. They'd gone to Africa on their honeymoon, and they chose not to have kids, and they weren't very effective with the local people. Why? Because in the local custom, if God didn't bless your marriage with kids, there was something wrong with you. And so once she fell pregnant, then boom, things opened up. And it's just a mythical understanding.
Yeah, and that was a cross-cultural situation.
Cross-cultural thing. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 7, Paul makes this statement, I wish that all of you were like me, i.e. single. Now, let me just say that I've sometimes seen Christian guys use that as an excuse. I used to tease Lynn before we were dating, but I knew she liked me. I used to tease her about this verse and say, all you need is a electric blanket and a dog as companion and a chef, and you're fine. The reality is that there are very, very few people that I've met who have the gift of celibacy. Very few do. Most people don't. And if you don't have the gift of celibacy, then you should get married. I mean, that's the idea. And so this notion that it's better to be single is actually contrary to what Genesis says. God said it's not good for man to be alone. And his idea is that we be in a relationship unless we do have the gift of celibacy, a rare gift. So if you see a beautiful woman walking past on the sidewalk, guys, and you're upset because she's blocking the view of the car or the motorbike or something, you might have the gift of celibacy, but I've seldom seen it. Next one is similar to this. These are all kind of spiritually kind of reasons. I'm not sure it's God's will for me. And so this notion, how do I know it's God's will? And therefore, they don't actually pursue it with faith and with vigor.
Yeah.
And, but as we said, God said it's not good for man to be alone. And so he put men and women together to complement each other, to be partners. The other thing is old wounds or past hurts. I mean, this is a big factor. So people haven't dealt with past baggage and consequently can't move forward. As people say, get rid of the junk in the trunk, get rid of the stuff, but also don't wait until you're 100% sorted out. Don't have this expectation like, I want a certificate of good health from his psychologist, his psychiatrist, his medical doctor, and so on. No, it's going to be, as you say, two imperfect people marrying each other and then working on their stuff together as they go forward. You know, somebody has said that hurt people and healed people heal people. While you can come into a relationship as two imperfect people, but with a commitment to be bringing about healing. So the last one that we're going to cover is, there's a soulmate out there for me. How do we discover the soulmate? You know, with some of these dating apps, you almost get a lifetime guarantee, right? You get your money back if you don't find somebody who's amazing. And there's an article actually that's called Great Expectations, and this lady Polly Schulman says, nowadays we want it all. We want a partner who's going to complement us, understand our weaknesses and help our strengths and do all of these amazing things. In other words, we've got really huge expectations, rather than the guy's got 2 eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs, you know, he brushes his teeth and he has a job. You know, we have these very, very great expectations, and we call that person the perfect match or the soulmate. And in some respects, I think you could line up a bunch of single men and single women, and you could match them together, and they could figure it out. They could make something happen. Not to overstate that, but we have many friends in India, and we ask them, where did you meet? And they say, at the church. In other words, it was
just shortly
prior to that, you know. So it's an arranged marriage. And there's a guy, Josh Coleman, a San Francisco psychologist, who says people are made to feel nowadays that remaining in a marriage that doesn't make you blissfully happy is an act of existential cowardice. In other words, I've got to be made to feel amazing by this relationship. Otherwise, I'm entitled to get out of it. Rather than saying, look, this is going to be a partnership which will require work. And so if that's the case, you know, what an entrepreneur does is take something that's not fantastic and make it fantastic. That's what we do in our business life. That's what a manager does. They come into a mess. They put processes, policies, procedures in place, and they sort their way through it. But when it comes to relationship, we somehow have to find the perfect woman, the perfect man, and then it just goes on autopilot. Nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah. So next time we'll talk about how do you be approachable? How do you be more available? How do you have more initiative in the session after that? But let's download this paper with the 15 reasons that people avoid marriage. Think about if any of them are actually applicable in your own situation, and say, how do I have to change my thinking, renew my thinking, change my mindset about this, so that I don't have false barriers to something that God wants to be a present reality in your life.
And just to say that we know many people are not trying to avoid marriage.
Yeah, that's true.
And so we know many people are really, really wanting to be married. And so just skip over that word and just see if there's any truth anywhere in this. And our hearts are with you, and we hope that this is going to be a helpful series for you as we unpack various things, even in the podcast coming up.
Yeah, it's not on our list of things over here, but I was chatting with a couple recently who have 4 kids, and they were saying, you know, the guy was saying, where do my daughters go to meet guys? Because it's COVID, people are locked up, and they don't want to go to bars. That's not the kind of person that they want to meet in a bar. So where do you actually go to meet people? And we recognize that there's a lack of gathering places, good gathering places and natural ways to do that. And we understand why. There are apps where people can meet each other. And so, you know, there's many other practical reasons that get in the way. And we're empathetic towards that. We don't have this all figured out. and they'll never listen to this, so I can safely tell you I have 2 children who are not married. So it's not like we have the perfect formula, but we are saying these are some of the things that we've seen as we've dialogued with people over the years. So thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Go to the page at brettjohnson.biz and you'll be able to download the PDF and make sure that you get a hold of that. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.